tagging people because when they put that, they post.
So here's you and me. We're walking this way. We're walking through the house. See? That's right. And we're walking through the dining room. And here's the kitchen of the place that we're staying. See, big kitchen. Now where we are staying, actually, currently, weird angles, what's happening? There. Where we are staying, it's not inside here, but rather in the backyard. So let me show you that. You go through this little area, come down here, and that's where we're living right now. Not the nice big one, but this one. That was me kissing you, by the way. This was the light of my life. This is where we are staying right now. It's a bit of a struggle, but we're doing it for you, little man. Hold on. Let's enter. That's where we keep all our crap, and that's where we all sleep. You, me, Mom, and Weddy Woo. And so a bunch of stuff happened since we talked last, and I'll elaborate on that when I finish the rest of this video later on tonight, okay? But for now, I just wanted you to see yourself at 6 months old, because I realize I probably talk to you in these videos perhaps as if you're young, and if I do, forgive me for that, because right now this is you. This is how I'm used to talking to you, is in this, hey little buddy, hey little buddy, I love you, I love you. Let's get you boosted up. Oh, there's some blurb for you. All right, well, I'm gonna clean you up and we'll talk in a minute. Hey, number three. All right, well, hey bud. So, you're gonna hear me huffing and puffing on this one, because I'm on the exercise bike here. That when you came along, I realized I want to stick around for a minute. So this is one of the things I'm doing to accomplish that. Regardless, though, no matter what, by the time you're saying this, I have departed. But so goes life. I had a bunch of ideas of different things I wanted to do this one on initially, but a lot of things have really changed in the last number of months here since the most recent one that we did. Hold on, I'm going to turn the fan on here. It's cold. I mean, it's warm. So, there's a lot of stuff that's happened. First off, we just celebrated your 6-month birthday. 6 months old. And man, you are beautiful as it gets. You're starting to sort of come alive and be more present, and you're starting to hang out now without freaking out about something. Previously, you would you're all about eating or getting something else done, your diapers changed or whatever, and you're still all about those. But there are those times when you just hang out now, and you're playing with stuff. You can grab your feet, and we're starting to feed you little applesauces and things like that. And you're playing in these little play, toy things that your mom got you, so that you can start to develop your coordination and all that stuff. But right now, so things happened a few months ago with my mother, your grandmother, and the situation there where we were living, because we were staying with her, while we saved up to get a new place for just you and Pam and I. Things were going fine, and then everything blew up. And my mom displayed some unfortunate behaviors, and it sort of caused me to question a bunch of stuff in my life around my mom's attitude, the entire time I was growing up. very manipulative behaviors, just some really difficult to deal with type things. Some bullying behaviors. I don't know if that's the right word, just my way or the highway, insistent behaviors. And along with some really inappropriate behaviors towards your mom. And so we went about trying to get some legal protection and a restraining order and things like that. And that wasn't granted to us because the things that my mom is doing don't rise to the level. And it stirred up some pain, and just some deep-seated pain in me. It's also caused us to be homeless. We are right now living in that RV I showed you in the video earlier, and that's kind of where we're at right now. And I think it can be a little tense, and we're struggling right now. Now, we've struggled through worse, and we're going to come back through this, but we're going to rise above this, and as you will come to find out. But it's a struggle. It's an emotional struggle. It's for me, it's a big struggle because it breaks my heart what my mother is doing. And so it's a lot of things right now. God bless my mentor and brother, Dennis Spear, whose house we're staying at right now, who's a man who, after my father died, became like a second father to me. He's in the men's division that has changed my life, and that's the circle of men who hold me accountable, who help me try to be as honest with myself and others as I can, and they support me as I grow through life. And I hope there's something like that for you when you become of age. But the biggest thing for me is just the heartbreak of my mom. The financial stuff and all of that is very difficult to deal with, and but we're going to get through that. The stuff with my mom has caused me to question a lot of things, and it's pretty ugly right now, and it breaks my heart because I love her, and I know that she loves me, but she was raised in certain ways which have created certain behaviors in her, which I'm only now, for the first time in my life, at 49 years old, with my therapist, thank God, starting to truly see for what they are. And they're problematic behaviors. And I hope the behaviors that I don't visit on you. I don't think I will. I'm sure my fuck-ups will be a whole other range of their own fuck-ups that you can see your therapist about. Yay! But here's the thing. I'm going to do my best in life to show you I love you directly, no strings attached. It's a little different with the way my mom is with me. And so, because of all this stuff and the way everything's going on, I don't know if you're going to remember or if you're going to have a relationship with my mom, because right now it doesn't look like it. And that's unfortunate because I wanted her to meet you. But I don't know if she's going to do the work that she would have to do to allow that to happen. So instead of some of the other things I was going to do this video on, I've decided that I want to give you a little bit of a background on some people that you're never going to meet, which are my mom and my dad, your grandmother and grandfather. And you never know, maybe my mom will live a very long time and she'll get her stuff together and you'll meet her or know her, remember her. But just in case, or in the likelihood that that doesn't happen, I wanted to tell you a little bit about them. So we'll start with my mom because she is the one that's on my mind and that I've been talking to you about here. And a lot of the behaviors she's displaying towards me and Pam, the manipulation and the overbearingness, the demandingness, the insistence, things like that, come from a place of fear and insecurity that stems from her childhood. So this is the way that shakes out. So my mom was born in, now this is where you're going to realize over time, you probably already know it by the time you're seeing this, I am horrible with dates, times, things like that. Birthdays, I am just grateful that your mother's birthday is on tax day, because I've been able to remember it for that very reason. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't. But my mom was born in 1954, I believe. And June 4th, I want to say. And she was born to Harold Fischer and Marion Fischer. And Harold Fischer was a World War II vet. When he grew up rough in the streets in the 1930s. And, 1930s. Didn't, his dad split on him when he was real young. His mother was very abusive to him. He ran in the streets with kids on their own, like I think in Chicago or somewhere, big city. And he started drinking early on when he was like in his teens. I mean, not teens, he was like younger than that, he was like 12 or something. Started drinking, getting into trouble, started getting legal problems because of that. And ended up, in order to deal with a court case or something, I'm not entirely totally clear about some of this stuff, but ended up enlisting in the military for World War II. Of course, there was a draft at the time, and it was probably going to happen anyway, but he was like 17, so he wouldn't have gotten drafted right away, but he volunteered and he got his mother's permission to enter the military instead of go to jail. And so he did that. My granddad, my mom's dad, was no joke of a human being. He was a Screaming Eagle, which is a military branch or whatever of the Army. 81st Airborne is what it is. And they were the guys that jumped out of planes in parachutes on D-Day into Germans who were shooting at them. And, the man to his left and the man to his right were both shot dead in the air while they were coming down. And from there on D-Day, he was dropped down behind enemy lines with the rest of the 81st Airborne, and they went fighting hand to hand. What are those things, the knives on the end of the rifles? Skewering those into Germans, being skewered by Germans. He fought face to face, hand to hand, in mortal combat with German soldiers, Nazis. And boy, howdy, you could see that in his face. When I was a little kid, and I would visit him as a child, once my mom made peace with her family. Here's the thing, she's replaying out her own stuff that she had with her parents without even realizing it. So she was estranged from them because of the way things were and how abusive they were. But later on, when I was like 6, something like that, made peace with them to some degree, and we would go visit. And when I first saw him, I immediately started crying, I'm told. And I do remember that he scared me, even just his attitude, just this tight crew cut, like he was a big guy and he had this crew cut that was like about that, G.I. Joe haircut. And you could just see in his eye that he'd killed people, plenty. And so he went away to the war, and then he came back. When he came back, he was a cab driver in Chicago. He actually drove Al Capone around for a while. And Al Capone gave him a card one time and said, you ever need anything, let me know. So there was that. He started drinking again and everything when he got back from, he probably never stopped, actually. He's probably drinking when he was over there, too. I can't imagine that he was having fun killing people without drinking a little bit. And came back, he was a cab driver. Something brought him out to California, and I don't know what that is or what that was. But once he got out here, he met my mother. He became a short order cook out here in Santa Clara, I think, or the Bay Area, San Jose, something like that. and met my grandmother, Marion. Now, Marion was born to a woman I actually got to know, my great-grandmother, Grandma Kay. And Grandma Kay came over with her parents as a kid from Switzerland or something in the late 1800s. Married a man. They bought a farm that was a very successful farm in San Jose. My grandmother, Marion, grew up on that farm and knew all about livestock, all that stuff. Very religious. The kind of religious folks who Mennonites, I think, wore nets on the head and all that stuff. My great-grandmother Kay was very disciplinarian. Whoosh, spare the rod, spoil the child. And so my grandmother, consequently, was very much that way. My grandmother also had a miscarriage, I believe, of what would have been my mother's older brother if he had survived. And she also had a brother who died in World War II, shot down. He was a pilot, I think, or something. Anyway, she, in retrospect, you could say she probably struggled with depression and anxiety issues. Because when my mother was growing up, she would be in bed for days at a time and struggling. And in light of her being in bed for days at a time, my mom, who was the oldest of 6 kids, something like that. I think it's 6. Yeah, 6. At 8 years old, my mom would make everybody else breakfasts and lunches, from pretty much 8 years old on. Would make them, everybody, sandwiches and stuff for school whenever my grandmother would be in that mode, in that bedtime depression. And in the meantime, my mom pretty much kind of bore the brunt of all that. So that made her very much a super achiever and very much a control freak and all that. I think I've put in enough pedaling. I'm going to stop pedaling so I won't be panting as much. At the same time, my grandmother would also fly into rages and get frustrated easily and would say very hurtful, mean things. I mean, cut to the core of who you are type of things to kids, to her kids when they were kids, In the meantime, on the other side of it was my granddad, and he was abusive. I mean, he was just abusive. He would line them up on Saturdays sometimes and line them up and then go down the line and smack them each in the head. Not like a funny little ha-ha smack, but I'm going to smack them in the head. And then he would say, imagine what you'd get if you'd done something. He would spank them, would whoop them. My grandmother pushed my mother through a door one time. And those behaviors led to my mom sort of being how she is now. And she was very much had the attitude of survival that she needed to have in order to survive, which was, if you want it done, you got to do it yourself. Don't give away control to anyone else. Don't be vulnerable. You got to be strong. You got to do the hard things. You got to muscle through. And for all of her attempts to not be like her parents, and she wasn't that way to me at all, but she, like all of us, and I hope mine isn't too destructive to you growing up, had a blind spot for the ways that she was like her parents. And the way she was that was some unintentional psychological damage that she inflicted. And as a child, that took the form of being overprotected. That assumption that she has to do everything and that certainly I probably wouldn't be strong enough to accomplish things or what have you, was significant enough that, that whole sense, that caused me to be insecure, caused me to have lack of self-confidence. Because she would do it for me and try to rescue me and all that stuff. And later on, as I became willful and became an adult and wanted to be myself, those judgments about who that was came into play. And especially after I became a drug addict, right? And she repeatedly acted in ways that I think she meant or intended to help me. A tough love kind of thing, right? And it didn't. It just hurt me. And then, of course, Pam, your mom, was never good enough for me, right? Because, my mom had impossible, bar to rise to. There is no human woman who would ever rise to that bar that my mom had in her mind about who would be good enough, quote unquote, for me. And as she's gotten older, and especially since I've been in recovery, and what I mean by that is got my life together, since then, after the indictment and everything, and over the past 6 years, she's struggled to see me for who I am. I've continued to attempt to grow and become more, just learn all the things about myself that I didn't learn while I was an addict on the streets, or while I was a kid being overprotected, right? And she struggled with that respect for me and my autonomy, and knowing where boundaries are, and respecting them. And again, this all goes back to, I see where it comes from. It comes from the way she was raised, and that whole sense on a deep psychic level that she doesn't even probably realize of, I've got to do it all. I have to be the one to take control. And her inability to let go of that when you were born, and her insistence on certain things, and her behavior towards Pam, and her refusal to accept the boundaries that I've attempted to put up with her in order to have a healthy relationship. In light of all that, she's not in my life right now, and that saddens me. But it's the truth, and I get it, and hopefully that will change in the future. In any case, when she was 19, or not, 19 actually, or 18, when she met my dad, your granddad, decided, I'm done with this shit, and I need something else. And my dad came along. He'd just gotten out of the military. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to press stop on this video right here so that I can actually upload this, because otherwise it'll be too long and it won't let me. And then we're going to continue on with information about your granddad, after whom you're named. Stay tuned. And we're back. Okay. So, when my mom was 18, she met my dad. She was in church singing in a choir. And let me tell you about my dad. My dad had just come back from Vietnam, and where he'd found religion, quote unquote, temporarily at least, while he was over there. And he came back and he went to this church and he saw my mom. Now, let me tell you about my dad. Let me tell you about his parents first. Let me tell you about that. Let's go all the way back here. So my dad, Peter Allen Van Nuys, was born to Elizabeth Van Nuys. She'd been Elizabeth Hess, was her maiden name. Elizabeth Van Nuys and Alan Van Nuys. Now, Alan was born to my great-grandfather, whom I never met, who was a preacher, a sophisticate, a gentleman of means to some degree, but a scholar and a cleric, as it were. He was the pastor of a huge church in San Francisco, which to this day still stands. And it's this huge Gothic-looking, one of these ancient structures in stone with gargoyles and everything on top of it. A huge church in San Francisco. He was the pastor. I don't know much about Grandpa Allen's mom. To tell you the truth, I can't really tell you anything about her because I'm not sure. But, actually, no, that's not true. I'm recalling it a little bit. From what I understand, she was a genteel, knowledgeable, refined woman. She would have tea parties and things like that. I don't know much else beyond that other than she was a very gracious person and very kind and, again, knew how to hold her pinky up when she drank fucking tea, whatever. So they had my grandpa Alan, and my great granddad, the one I just told you about, who was the pastor, had gone to Stanford, Ivy League school. And as such, my granddad, Alan, was able to get into Stanford as, what do you call that? When you're ushered in because you're, legacy. There it is. As a legacy candidate, because his father had gone. And so my granddad got into Stanford. Grandpa Alan, although I never met him, my Grandma Whimsy, and first off, Elizabeth Van Nuys, formerly Elizabeth Hess, and her maiden name, my dad's mom. We're from hereforth going to refer to as Whimsy, because that's what she insisted I call her as a kid. And we'll get more into that in a minute. So, my Grandpa Alan was, I'm not sure why Whimsy came up. I guess I'll have to review this and figure out why I even brought her up. Brain, holes in the brain. Don't do drugs, kid, okay? Because they don't go away. So, Grandpa Alan, I never met him. This is why I brought her up. That's right, down the rabbit hole. From what I understand of him, that I learned from my Grandma Whimsy, he was, first off, very intelligent. Second off, funny. Apparently had a good sense of humor. And third, he was an artistic soul. He was an actor. He loved acting and theater. And, but that generation had the misfortune of being born at a time when every man of draftable age was to be drafted to fight in World War II. And my granddad, as a Stanford graduate, who was still of that age, was able to call his shots a little bit better. If you have a college education, you could get a better placement in the military. And so he ended up going into military intelligence. And military intelligence would later become the CIA. So the CIA became that in the ashes of World War II, after World War II. Before that, it was called military intelligence, and it was a division of the Army, and he was a member of that military intelligence organization. And from what I understand, and I will forever be upset that I lost a little journal that I used to have, I had it for years, that my Grandpa Alan kept during his service in World War II, which was, by the way, illegal, and he could have been court-martialed for doing it. God bless him, but he did it anyway, and it was full of just fascinating stuff about what he had done over there. But in my drug addict days, I lost it, and I'll always be bummed out about that. But from what I understand, his role in military intelligence, once he got into that, was to go behind enemy lines to France, basically snuck into France through underground means, and worked with the French resistance in France while they were being occupied by Germany. And so acts of sabotage, planning resistance in different ways. And among those duties was to help plan and pave the way for D-Day, the very same D-Day my grandfather from my mom, the very same D-Day upon which he jumped out of a plane into France to kill Germans. My granddad, Grandpa Alan, my dad's dad, was part of planning that behind enemy lines. He was over there for years. He couldn't talk to my grandmother. Very rarely, occasionally he'd be able to come back, but not frequently at all. So he was almost gone almost the whole time, 2 or 3 years, because he was deeply entrenched over there. So when the war ended, he came back and couldn't quite find his place in this society. Now, he started drinking a lot and became very depressed. He tried to have a factory job and couldn't fit in there. I'm not even sure why he tried to have a factory job. He was a Stanford graduate. I don't know why he was even doing that, except for, I think, that he was having trouble executing the sort of high-minded tasks, whatever you want to call it, the sort of intellectual pursuits, he was having trouble executing those things, following through, getting things done over here. And he sank into a deep, deep depression. Now, what we know now that we didn't know then is that he was most likely suffering from PTSD. He was most likely suffering from the effects of the things that he had to do in that war. And I'm sure my other granddad in some way was suffering from that too. They just went about dealing with that in different ways. So Grandpa Harold was abusive and shitty and hard. And so hard that, in fact, my mom had to elope with my dad when they finally married, but we'll get that in a minute. Because he wouldn't give his blessing and stuff. But my Grandpa Alan dealt with it through... Oh, wait, here's one thing to say, by the way. When my Grandpa Harold on my mom's side and my mom's mom, Marion, met, Marion, my grandma, basically said, "You're not drinking anymore. No more drinking." And so he stopped that day and never drank again until the day he died of cancer when I was like 7 or 8 years old. And I think that might also be a part of the abusiveness because he was a dry drunk. He didn't go to AA or any support or any of that stuff. So he was an angry, dry drunk, meaning he was still an asshole, but he just wasn't drinking, so it made it worse. My Grandpa Alan, now my dad's dad, fell into this Great Depression, fell into this deep depression, started drinking a lot, and unfortunately, one day when my dad was 13, my Grandpa Alan literally said, "I'm going to the store." Like, "I'm going to go to the store." Not like figuratively. Oh, he said, "I went to the store and never came back." No, he said, "I'm going to the store," and he did not come back. And almost a year later, whenever my dad's next birthday was, which would have been his 13th actually, I think it happened when he was 12. Whenever that birthday would have been, or whenever that happened, which from my understanding was 6, 7, 8 months later, my dad got a phone call, picked it up, and there was nobody on the other line, just the sounds of a bar, like people drinking. And the suspicion has been that that was likely my grandfather calling and not knowing what to say. So my Grandpa Alan never came back to the family. And, you know, he ended up dying early, like in his... I was probably like 8 years old or something when my father, who had not talked to his dad since he was a kid, got a phone call from my grandmother, I think, saying that that his dad was dead. And his dad went on a walk in Santa Barbara where he had moved, and he was probably in his 60s by then, and he'd been drinking a lot, and he just died of a heart attack in the woods. Now, my Grandpa Alan did manage to embrace the theater again before he died, and I found a bunch of these headshots, agent shots, you know, so that he could get cast into different things. And apparently he was doing plays, dinner theater, getting paid for that. So that's good that he found that calling again. Now, he and my grandmother Whimsy managed to stay friends over that time once he got back in touch with her. But he definitely broke her heart. Now, Grandma Whimsy, arguably the most significant grandparent. I love my Grandma Whimsy. I loved her to death, man. She died when I was still in my addiction, and that's a great sorrow to me. It was probably 2005 or something, I can't remember. And she was a pillar in my life. So she was raised by her father and my great-grandmother, Julie. I also got to meet my great-grandmother, Julie. And my great-grandmother, Julie, in her lifetime, she was born on a farm in the 1800s. And, you know, when she was a kid, there were no cars, there was no nothing. There were horses and there were buggies. And by the time she died in her 90s, man had already walked on the moon, and we were sending space shuttles up. And I am amazed by that amount of growth that a society can have in one lifetime. That's a brain blower. Anyway, she married my great grandpa Bryce. My great grandpa Bryce they were both again of money at the time. All that evaporated before I came around, but they were both lady and gentlemen of means and wealth. And my grandpa Bryce was a pharmacist, I believe, and was an experimental guy, like helped create things, chemicals, whatever, and was actually a founding member of, I think it was Bausch and Lomb or one of these big corporations, and unfortunately he just sold his shares in it or his part of that company before they blew up and became huge. But he nonetheless had money. They got married. I don't know much about that relationship other than I guess my great grandpa Bryce was a philanderer and cheated on my great grandmother. My great grandmother, Julie, my mom's grandmother, my dad's grandmother, my great grandmother Julie, my dad's grandmother, was a rare a rare specimen indeed of a human being. Here she is, born in the 1800s, and she traveled the world on her own after she divorced Grandpa Bryce in the 20s or something, 1920s, on her own around the entire globe. Broke her arm in Siam, they called it back then, became Vietnam. Got it fixed by a doctor in Vietnam in like 1919 or 1920, whatever this is, and then continued on her way in this whole trip around the globe. She was also a suffragette. They marched for the right for women to vote because women couldn't vote back then. And she was a no kidding person. She used to hide Brock's candies. It was her favorite candy was Brock's, and she would hide them all over. When I was a little kid growing up in her house, hide them all over the house. And if you found one, you better leave it be, because if she found that you'd found it and it was gone, there's going to be a talking to. It was going to happen. So, they had my grandmother. My grandmother, Whimsy, was born in Chicago, raised in a mansion. They had a boat on the lake. They had cars. She was a flapper, which was a jazz dancer. Look it up if we've never talked about her, you don't know what that is. 1920s flapper, jazz age. She would go out drinking when it was prohibition. She would go to speakeasies, illegal bars because you couldn't drink. And she would dance the night away to jazz music and wear pearls, and got into an auto accident when she was like 19 or something because she and her buddies were all drinking in some Model T Ford or something, and it flew off a hill, and she was thrown from the vehicle, and she just got up and brushed herself off and walked away. She was an amazing human being. I love my grandma Whimsy to this day, and I wish that I had loved jazz music the way I came to love jazz music when she was still alive, because she loved jazz music, saw all the jazz greats. So, those are the grandparents. Now, my mom and dad. So, I told you a little bit about how my mom was raised, kind of abusively. My dad, of course, his dad left him, so he had issues around that. He was an only child. On that side of my family, I'm a third generation only child. You may be a fourth generation only child, which is what I'm suspecting, but who knows? So, my dad grew up as an only child. He was a gentle soul, a beautiful human being, creative. He was a little troublemaker when he was a kid, too. He used to get into trouble with his best friend, Alex. Alex Elliott was the guy's name. And, they would do some stuff, trying to throw bottles off of, overpasses onto cars. That's no good. But he was young when he did that. He was the light of my grandmother's life. She loved him to death. He was also sort of insecure. He was a skinny person, tall. very intellectual, didn't really know how to fit in sometimes with people. And so he put himself into his intellect and to his creativity. And that's, if there's one word that would describe my dad, it's creativity. He was a creative man. And he ended up going to Vietnam voluntarily. He was going to San Diego State University for electronics. He was having trouble, not getting the best of grades, didn't really know what to do. The draft was on for Vietnam, and so instead of wait to get drafted, you could choose what you wanted to do if you voluntarily stepped in, as opposed to them drafting you and just saying, look, you're going to the front line. So my dad voluntarily joined the Air Force, and got into electronics through them and learned all about electronics. He was stationed in Udeng Thani, I believe is the name of the place, in Thailand, across the border from Vietnam. And it was the base where all the CIA planes would come through to do these illegal missions that weren't happening, you know. So you got to see all that going down. While he was there, at some point, there was a period when he had been offered the opportunity to go out with a bunch of his friends into the local town there, and they were going to drink and get prostitutes and party, right? And my dad had another person who offered him to go to this prayer thing, or this religious thing that was going on the base. And my dad, for whatever reason, probably because he felt uncomfortable going out and whoring and partying, went instead to this religious thing, and came to find out later that the people who had left to go do all that stuff ended up getting killed. Something happened, a bar fight or something, and they were killed and arrested and all this other stuff. And my dad sort of took that as a sign. So when he came back from the war, he was trying to keep going to church, and he went to church in Monterey, which is where my mom grew up and was living, and where my dad grew up in Carmel, right? And so I'm not sure why he was in Monterey at the time. I think he was working there. Came back and met my mom, saw my mom singing in the choir, and was smitten with her. And on their very first date, apparently told her, I'm going to marry you. And my mom laughed in his face, which is like, are you kidding me? So, but he did. He married her. And she was 19. They eloped. You know, when I was growing up, the roles were sort of reversed. You know, all of my friends growing up had these sort of traditional sort of relationships with their fathers and mothers. Their mom was the nurturing, caring, loving sort of one who would be into art, or, you know, the softer things in life. And you know, perhaps creativity, things like that. And the father would be into sports, or, you know, would be a no-nonsense guy who would be like, don't talk about your emotions, or, you know, buck up, buttercup, or whatever. Classic example of that is one of my best friends, Matt Ashley, whose father, his mother was a piano teacher, and she drank wine, and his father was a bronze-winning Olympic medalist, water polo player. He was a jock, and he drank beer, right? And they had a daughter and a son, and a cat and a dog, right? A lot of my friends, that was their deal. For me, it was reversed. There was, my mother was into sports. She turned me on to the Raiders. I don't know if I still have the Raiders now, because they've made some really bad decisions lately, but Raiders football, man, I grew up watching that, and I love the Raiders because of my mom's influence. She was a little more of the disciplinarian. I don't know if that's fair to say, but because my dad would, you know, discipline me as well, but she would be the one, they would kind of do that together, but she would be lobbying for the sort of more stern response in any given infraction that I as a kid would make. We didn't really have that sort of warm, fuzzy, cuddly relationship that a lot of my friends had with their mothers. It was a little more formal, a little more distant. She was very overprotective, though, as well. So, you know, I'm still processing that right now. That's the stuff I'm processing right now. Like, why is that? Now as I see that clearly, in light of the things that have happened recently, why, you know, I'm starting to wonder, why was she that way with me? Did she want me? Did she just marry my dad to get away from her family? I don't know. I'd like to think not. I think she's more complicated than that. I think she did love me. I think she does love me, as well as she knows what that means. And I'm sure that, I know that she loved my dad. I don't know what her initial intentions were, but whatever they were, my dad was lovable enough that she came to love him if she didn't originally. In any case, she was like that with me. My dad was the guy he was where I would talk about crazy, creative things, emotions, wild fantasy, like, he loved movies. We would watch these movies about emotion and the human condition. I remember as a little kid, I would sit on his lap when I was like 5, 6 years old, and he used to draw really well, which he got from my grandmother, because my grandmother was an art student. My grandmother Whimsy met my grandpa Alan, while she was in San Francisco at the art university there. And she was a really good artist, and she stayed a good artist into her 80s. So she provided that sort of influence that my dad really took to. And when I was 5 years old or so, you know, my dad would have me sit on his lap and he'd ask me to describe a wild alien landscape. I might have been 6 or so. I don't think I was much older than 7. And I would describe this alien world, and he would draw it for me right in front of him. We'd have long conversations about the universe, about what's really out there, about quantum physics. We would analyze movies. We would get into these debates and conversations about what a movie meant. We would look at the symbolism of this movie, like, well, what did that, you know, this movie is an allegory for this other thing, you know, and I'd have endless conversations with him like that. And, you know, when I was growing up as a teenager, we had one conflict. Well, I had a lot of conflicts with him as a teenager, don't get me wrong. I was a little asshole, just like every teenager. But, but I mean, I didn't get into those big butting of the heads like I did with my mom. You know, there was one time when my dad laid down the law and he said, "You're not going out this door." And I said, "Oh yeah, I am." And we wrestled. And guess what? I didn't get out the door. He was strong, even though he was skinny. So my relationship with my mom and my dad are very different. My mom was very practical. My dad was very emotional. You know, my mom sort of set a lot of the parameters that allowed our little family to grow and prosper and stuff. And my dad provided a lot of the inspirations that caused me to want to grow. I was definitely closer to my dad. That's why I named you for him. And I will forever be bummed out that you didn't get to meet him. When you were born, I wore his favorite shirt. It's the one thing I have left from my dad that I still have physical object. That's not true, actually. I have some objects in storage, but it's the one sort of thing I can wear was his favorite shirt. And that shirt was a shirt that had this cartoon frog from this cartoon, Looney Tunes cartoon, called One Froggy Night, which you should see if you've not. And it's a funny cartoon. And it was our favorite cartoon together when I was growing up. And I wore that shirt when you were born. On the day you were born, I wore that shirt in his honor and to bring him into the room. And when I was growing up, let's see, we lived in Carmel. And when I was a little kid, we were broke. We lived on my grandmother Whimsy and Grandma Julie's floor. We slept on the floor. And my parents saved up money. My dad was working as a radio station DJ, or program director. I think he moved up to program director eventually. And Carmel was very expensive to live in. And my mom wasn't working. And we managed to, my dad ended up getting a job offer for a radio station in Modesto, and we all moved there because the price of living was so cheap. And Modesto sucked. Central Valley was the horrible place. First night I was there, 104 degrees or something. And in any case, it allowed them to buy a house, though. They owned a house there. My mom ended up working in a bank for a while when I was in junior high. My dad moved from radio stations to a college, and he started teaching media at Modesto Junior College. And my mother went to school during that time then to become a nurse, an RN, and so they came up economically together. They would take turns supporting each other to do that. And my mom fell more and more in love with my dad as they got older. And when I was, in our 20s, early 20s, and still living at home, and late teens, we would take 3 vacations. My mom would take a little vacation on her own. My dad would take his own little vacation, and then we would take a family vacation. And that sort of sense of respect and allowing each other the space to be who you are has stuck with me. It's something that I try to have with your mother, and that she has with me, and I'm grateful for that. This is already turning into too long a video, so I'm going to have to tell you more about my dad later. I mean, I guess I'll have to do that over different times. I mainly wanted to tell you about my mom, because I don't know if you're ever going to meet her. But what I will say is this, is that they remained married until the day my father died. My dad was born in 1944. He died in 2000. And that's when my world collapsed and my addiction and everything started, because my father was my best friend on this planet. And he supported my creative endeavors. He informed them. He loved music. When I was a little kid, he would record the symphony, the Carmel Symphony. He recorded it. He was the one who would say everything set up to air it on the radio. And so I would see the symphony with him. We would go see movies and talk about them. It was important at a movie to never eat the popcorn before the movie starts. Not during the coming attractions. No heathens do that bullshit, okay? He was excited about things. He met this group of younger people who were my age when I was in my 20s. He met a group of them. I didn't know them, but they were his students at Modesto Junior College. He became friends with some of them, and they would put him in their student movies. Those people, oh no, those people were inspired by him to a degree that they still reach out to me and tell me how much he meant to them. And those people are all working in Hollywood. Those people are literally producers of movies and television shows. And he was a part of what inspired them to do that. And, he's a beautiful man. And a sweet spirit. And a creative soul. He could write. He was a writer. He could write really well. Loved Frank Herbert, Dune, the Dune movies. Loved Frank Herbert so much, or movies, there were books. It became movies, but loved Frank Herbert so much that he took a trip one time up to the Frank Herbert Memorial Library, which was actually the house where Frank Herbert lived and wrote all the Dune books. Spent like 3 or 4 days up there, like poring over the archives and everything. Just the force of creativity and love that I aspire to embody. I've also got some of my mom's action in me too, though, so I can be harsh and I can be, this is the thing, and I've lived a hard life in a lot of ways, so, I can also have that toughen up buttercup thing to me. I hope that I'm able to balance those with you. I definitely want to inspire you. You're a beautiful little boy already, and I can only imagine you're going to be a fucking awesome man. And I hope that you are able to absorb some of those elements that I've just told you about. Yeah. So I guess that's about it for now. I'm scattered. I'm tired. You don't let me sleep for more than fucking 45 minutes at a time. Shit. Love you to death. You slept for 6 hours the other night, and I was like, oh, this is a trend. Nah. 45 minutes at a time the next night. So keep it up. Kidding. I'm not. I'm exhausted, but I love you. Every single day that I wake up and I see your little face, it doesn't matter how much sleep I got or didn't get. So I hope this. I know this was a long one. Sorry, keep on getting long. But I hope I've told you a little bit more about your grandparents and your great-grandparents. And your great-great-grandparents. That's all I know. Okay, buddy. Till next time. Happy 6-month birthday also. Except you're a lot older now. Okay. Talk to you later. I love you.